This is the brief on bridging the C2 plus expression gap in English. Today, we're unpacking how advanced, non-native speakers can stop sounding like watered-down versions of themselves by learning to actually think directly in English, rather than just translating. First, we've got to adopt the architecture of native ideas. You see, native speakers don't just translate words, they use a point-first mindset, meaning you literally state your conclusion right up front before diving into the evidence. Translating word for word is kind of like tossing scattered bricks at your listener, whereas this idea architecture gives them a clear, easy-to-follow blueprint. Second, you've got to master on-the-spot articulation using the PREP framework, which is point, reason, example, point. Now, you might be thinking, doesn't a rigid formula like that make me sound totally robotic? Well, I thought so too, but it actually frees up your brain to focus purely on the message, making it a total mental liberator for those abstract questions. Finally, use your vocabulary and grammar for real idea control, not just correctness. Adopt a lexicon of thought using words like contend or concede to confidently position your ideas. Try throwing in advanced grammar, like cleft sentences, saying, it's the culture, not the strategy. Think of advanced grammar not as a bunch of strict rules, but as a literal spotlight you use to force the listener to pay attention to what matters most. Ultimately, by mastering this structure, framing, and stance, you can finally stop translating your mind and express your ideas at their absolute full size.
Welcome to Daily English Flow. Stay until the end for a special bonus tip. Don't forget to like and subscribe.
It is a uniquely frustrating feeling. I mean, I think we've all been there. You have this really brilliant, complex, deeply nuanced idea in your head.
Oh, absolutely.
And it's in your native language, right? It has all these layers and subtlety. But then the moment you open your mouth to try and say it in English, it comes out flat.
Yeah, it comes out simple.
Honestly, it comes out almost childish.
Like a completely different person is speaking.
Exactly. And if you've ever sat in a meeting and felt that specific frustration, this deep dive is entirely for you today. Because we are looking at this fascinating set of sources about what they call the C2 plus expression gap.
Right. And the source material actually has a perfect description for this feeling. They compare it to looking through the wrong end of a telescope.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So all of that immense detail in your mind, it just gets miniaturized the second it hits the air.
The shrinking personality phenomena. That's what I kept thinking of when reading this. You know that in your native language, you are witty, you are deep, you are highly articulate. But then in English, you end up sounding like this heavily simplified, almost robotic version of yourself. But the sources we're diving into today, they argue that overcoming this gap, it isn't about memorizing more vocabulary or doing more grammar drills. It's about fundamentally rewiring your architecture of thought, which is a huge claim.
It is, but it really is the crux of the issue. The core concept from our sources is that native speakers do not translate.
Right.
They are not sitting there in real time mapping a concept from some neutral thought language into English words. They fuse thought and language simultaneously, so they deploy what the material calls a pre-wired architecture of thought.
A pre-wired architecture.
Exactly. When you reach that C2 plus level, the absolute highest echelons of language mastery, the goal isn't accuracy anymore. You already know how to conjugate your verbs.
Right, you're not worrying about past tense.
No, you're way past that. The goal is expression.
Okay, let's unpack this, because reading through this research, a visual analogy immediately popped into my head.
Okay, let's hear it.
So, is speaking a second language the traditional way, basically like trying to build a house, but you're standing on the construction site frantically looking up the translation for the names of your tools?
Oh, I like that.
Like you're looking up hammer, you're looking up nail, you're looking up wood, whereas a native speaker isn't looking up anything. They just back up a truck and drop in a totally pre-assembled wall.
That is spot on. To take your construction analogy a step further, you can't build a prefab wall without first understanding how the materials are engineered to fit together.
Right.
You are trying to build from scratch using individual translated bricks while they are dropping in prefabricated structures.
And they don't even realize they're doing it.
Exactly. So to get to the point where you can just drop those structures into a conversation, our sources suggest unifying the core language skills into one master template. And it has to start with how we consume information. So listening and reading can't just be about absorbing content anymore.
Right, which makes total sense narratively. If you want to output native architecture, you have to absorb it first. You can't build the type of house you you've never actually observed.
Right.
But I want to push back on this a little because in practice, this sounds incredibly difficult.
Yeah.
If I'm listening to a really compelling speaker on a TED stage, say, or a brilliant podcast guest, I am naturally going to get caught up in the story they are telling. How do I turn that off and just hear the scaffolding?
Well, you have to treat it almost like a lab experiment. You have to temporarily strip away the emotion to see the mechanics. At the C2 Plus level, you stop listening for words, and you even stop listening for subtext. You listen entirely for the architecture of the ideas.
Okay, so how do we actually do that?
The source material offers a brilliant strategy for this. They call it the outline echo.
The outline echo.
Right. You listen to a 5-minute interview, but you take absolutely zero notes on the content. No facts, no figures, no heartwarming anecdotes.
You are just tracking the skeleton.
Exactly that. You reconstruct the speaker's mental outline. You ask yourself, okay, what was the main point? What specific frame did they use to introduce it? What examples supported it? And how did they land the conclusion?
And then what do you just write that down?
Well, once the audio finishes, you say that outline out loud. It forces your brain to recognize that native speakers build their thoughts in highly recognizable, repeatable patterns.
It's like looking at an X-ray of the speech instead of a photograph.
An X-ray, yeah.
You stop seeing the skin and you just see the bones. And part of that X-ray is what the sources call metaphor mining. This is mind-blowing to me.
Oh, yeah, the metaphor engine.
Yes, native speakers are running this constant underlying metaphor engine that they aren't even aware of.
They really are. We use conceptual metaphors to make abstract ideas instantly graspable. It is how we make the invisible visible. Think about how often you hear phrases like, "we're at a crossroads," or "let's unpack that argument."
Right, all the time.
The strategy here is that every time you hear a conceptual metaphor, you don't just write down the phrase, you identify the underlying frame.
So if someone in a meeting says, we need to bridge the gap between sales and marketing, the underlying frame is, ideas are physical structures.
Yes.
Or if they say the negotiation's completely derailed, the frame is progress is a moving train.
Exactly. And by collecting those frames, you are essentially building a native toolkit. When you need to explain why a project is failing, you don't have to search for abstract vocabulary, you just deploy the train frame.
Wow.
Another crucial listening strategy mentioned is stance detection. This is listening for the music of intellectual credibility.
Hedging and boosting.
Yes. You pay attention to exactly how a speaker positions their ideas. Are they warm? Are they critical? Do they boost their point by saying something is undoubtedly true? Or do they soften it by saying it is arguably a factor?
You're listening for how they calibrate their confidence.
Exactly.
Which transitions perfectly into reading because it is the exact same principle. We aren't reading to learn facts about economics or history anymore. We are reading to steal what the sources call the rhetorical DNA of great thinkers.
I love that phrase, rhetorical DNA.
Yeah, you go to places like The Atlantic or transcripts of great debates, and you become a structural thief. You aren't collecting vocabulary words, you're building a move bank.
Right. Instead of writing down a new adjective, you write down a rhetorical move. A classic example is the concession pivot.
Oh, right, I use that one. Well, I try to use that one.
It usually sounds something like, admittedly, the initial costs are high, yet the long-term compound effect is still the dominant factor. Or the reframe move, we've been asking the wrong question entirely.
Or the concrete anchor, where they make this huge, sweeping, abstract claim and then instantly ground it with a vivid physical image. Like the economy is slowing down, you can see it in the empty shipping containers at the port.
Yes, perfectly grounded.
You build this bank, and you essentially program those moves into your own muscle memory.
And to program that muscle memory, the material suggests the reverse outline. You take a beautifully written, complex essay, and you force yourself to reduce it to a 5-line skeleton. Point, frame, evidence, counter, argument, landing. It strips the paint off the walls and shows you the pipes.
But the kicker is what you do next. You have to speak that skeleton out loud as a 60-second mini-talk. You are turning the act of reading directly into speaking fuel. You read the blueprint and immediately practice building the wall.
Which brings us to the next phase of this architecture. Through listening and reading, we now know what the house is supposed to look like. We've stolen the blueprints. Now we have to gather our building materials. But at this advanced C2 plus stage, our materials aren't just lists of nouns and adjectives. We are entering the mental gym.
The mental gym.
This is where writing and vocabulary become the tools we use to actually reason.
Because at this level, vocabulary isn't about naming things in the physical world. It is the lexicon of thought.
It is about reasoning. We are talking about abstract nouns, words like trade-off, caveat, bottleneck, nuance. We are talking about stance verbs like content, concede, reframe. And those metaphorical verbs we touched on, derail, anchor, bridge. These are the words native speakers use to think aloud.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. The source material highlights a massive, massive trap here. It says you should never, under any circumstances, map these abstract words to their equivalents in your native language.
No, you absolutely cannot do that.
Yeah.
If you translate a word like nuance back into your native language, you are dragging all the cultural baggage, the syntax, and the sentence structures of your native language right back into your brain.
Oh, man.
You are pulling your old architecture into the new house. You have to learn these words purely as thinking tools in English.
You learn them in their native ecosystem. You don't just learn the word trade-off. You learn the whole structural thought. Every decision is a trade-off between speed and quality.
Exactly.
But practically speaking, how do you drill that without falling back on translation? Like, it's so tempting to just look up the word.
It is tempting, but the sources outline two fantastic methods. The first is the stance ladder. You practice expressing one single opinion, but you walk it up and down 5 different levels of certainty.
Okay, how does that sound?
You start at the bottom. It might be worth considering that our strategy needs an update. Then you move up. I contend that our strategy needs an update. All the way up to, there is absolutely no question that our strategy needs an update. You use those stance verbs and adverbs to calibrate the dial.
You aren't learning the word. You are learning the volume knob.
That's a great way to put it.
And the second method is that very strict rule, the 24-hour deployment. If you learn a new thought word, you have to speak it out loud in a real or simulated conversation within 24 hours, or it's dead vocabulary. You either use it to build a thought or you lose it.
And the safest place to practice building those thoughts is actually in writing.
Writing.
Yeah, writing is the ultimate mental gym because the sheer slowness of the medium forces clarity. You can't hide behind a charismatic tone of voice or quick hand gestures when you write.
Yeah.
You know you have to make the structure work on its own.
The drill they gave for this say it 3 ways is phenomenal for that.
Oh, I love that one.
You take one really complex idea and you force yourself to write it out in 3 entirely different architectural styles. So let's say the idea is about team dynamics.
Yeah.
Way number 1, you write it as a simple blunt point. Trust slows teams down. Way number 2, you use a framed metaphor. Distrust is sand in the machine.
Nice.
And then way number 3, you use a nuanced stance. Well, oversight has its place. Excessive control quietly taxes every interaction.
The reason this is so vital is that it builds expressive range. When you are on the spot in a high-stakes meeting, you do not want to be locked into just one way of phrasing a thought.
Right, you want options.
Exactly. You want the flexibility to read the room. Does this audience need the blunt point? Do they need the metaphor to visualize it? Or do they need the nuanced stance to feel respected?
You are building a wardrobe of ideas,
Yeah.
and you get to choose the right outfit for the occasion.
Yeah.
They also talk about the compression edit for writing. You write out a whole paragraph explaining a messy idea, and then you brutally force yourself to compress all of that meaning into a single, elegant sentence without losing the core truth. The quote from the source was, "Clarity makes ideas travel."
Clarity makes ideas travel. Writing is essentially the silent rehearsal for native expression. It is where you forge the materials, and once those materials are forged, we arrive at the output engine.
The output engine.
Yes. We've observed the architecture, we've gathered our reasoning tools, we've practiced slowly in writing. Now it is time for real-time execution, speaking, and grammar.
The moment of truth. And it starts with how we approach the point itself. The material calls this the deductive mind, or point-first speaking. Native English thinking is fundamentally deductive. You deliver the conclusion first, and the supporting evidence comes after.
Which is a profound cultural shift for a lot of learners. The translated style for many people is deeply inductive. They provide a lot of background context. They tell a story, they outline the history of the problem, and then at the very end, they arrive at the point.
Right, and if you do that in a native English boardroom, you can literally see the audience panicking.
Oh yeah, they start checking their watches.
They are thinking, where is this going? What do you want from me? It feels evasive, even if it's meant to be polite and thorough in the speaker's native culture.
The native expectation is to lead with the headline. I believe remote work is a net positive for our team for 3 reasons. First, you know you never bury the point. Everything that follows is just evidence for the headline you already stated.
That makes total sense. You build the roof, and then you show them the pillars holding it up. Another major part of this execution is the P-P framework. This is the ultimate tool for when you are put on the spot. PREP stands for point, reason, example, point.
The psychology of why PREP works so well is that it creates a closed cognitive loop for the listener. It is incredibly satisfying to the human ear.
Let's walk through a scenario just to make this really concrete. Say a client asks you a really abstract question out of nowhere, like, do you think it's better for a manager to be liked or respected?
Okay, instead of rambling inductively, you drop in the PREP architecture. You start with the point. I would argue it is absolutely better to be respected.
Okay.
Then the reason, because being liked is a fleeting emotion, whereas respect compounds over time.
Nice. Yeah.
Then you ground it with an example. Think of any leader people loved hanging out with but never took seriously. Their actual influence vanished the moment they left the room.
And then you close it.
You close the loop by returning to the point. So yes, respect is the foundation, liking is just a bonus.
I took, what, 10 seconds?
So,
It sounds incredibly polished, deeply articulate, but it requires zero preparation. You're just dropping that pre-assembled wall right into the conversation.
and notice the stance calibration in that example. I said I would argue it is absolutely better. I didn't say I kind of think maybe it's better. There is a critical trap warning in the sources regarding this. Hedge the claim, never the core point.
Wait, let me hypothesize here. So if I hedge the core point, I sound like I don't even believe my own idea. I sound weak. Like if I say, I sort of think our marketing strategy is failing. But if I hedge the scope of the claim, I just sound like a highly precise thinker.
That is the exact distinction. You don't hedge your belief. You confidently state a limited claim our current marketing strategy is arguably failing in the European market.
Oh, I see.
You sound authoritative but nuanced. You are protecting your argument from attack by limiting its scope rather than limiting your own confidence.
Ah, that is a subtle but massive difference. And to really drive those authoritative points home, the sources dive into rhetorical finishing, landing your ideas with native devices like the rule of three or contrast.
The human brain is essentially a pattern recognition machine. It loves the rule of three because 3 is the minimum number required to establish a pattern, reinforce it, and resolve it. When you say it's faster, cheaper, and frankly kinder, the brain feels a sense of rhythmic completion.
And contrast does something similar, like it's not a cost, it's an investment. By establishing what something isn't, you draw a stark boundary line around what it is. It gives the idea sharp edges.
These are the drum beats that make ideas memorable. But to truly orchestrate all of this, to control exactly how these patterns hit the listener's ear, we need the final piece of the puzzle.
So what does this all mean? It brings us to the final and, honestly, the most surprising element of the entire source text. When I first saw the word, I groaned. Grammar.
Most people hear grammar and they immediately think of red ink on a high school test.
Yes, exactly.
They think of arbitrary rules and correctness. But at the C2 Plus level, grammar has absolutely nothing to do with correctness. You already know the rules. At this level, grammar is entirely about cognition and control.
Yes. The sources call it the syntax of ideas. Advanced grammar structures aren't just fancy decorations. They are physical tools to shape exactly how an idea lands in the listener's mind. You described it beautifully in your notes earlier as a spotlight.
It is exactly like a theatrical spotlight. You can shift the grammatical structure to force the listener to look exactly where you want them to. Take cleft sentences, for example. You could walk into a meeting and say, a standard, plain sentence, the culture decides our execution. It's fine, it's accurate.
But it's flat.
Right. But if you use a cleft sentence, you split the sentence to create focus. You say, it is the culture, not the strategy, that decides our execution.
You literally feel the spotlight snap onto the word culture. The emphasis completely changes. The geometry of the sentence physically directs the brain.
Or consider inversion for emphasis. Instead of saying we rarely see a trade-off this stark, you invert the standard order. Rarely do we see a trade-off this stark.
That creates a tiny micro cliffhanger in the brain. By putting the adverb first, it signals to the listener, pay attention. This is highly unusual.
It absolutely does. The text also mentions using conditionals not just for hypothetical situations, but for active reasoning aloud. If we accept that premise, then the conclusion inevitably follows. It is a way of inviting the listener into your logical process step by step.
Like holding their hand through the thought.
Yes. And finally, positives for packaging ideas tightly.
Oh, right. Like saying, trust the invisible currency of teams compounds silently. You are wrapping a metaphorical frame right into the middle of the sentence. You don't have to pause and explain what trust is. You just inject the definition seamlessly.
And to train this, the host of the material recommends the focus rewrite strategy. It brings the mental gym and the output engine together. You write an idea out in a plain, boring sentence, then you rewrite it using a clef structure, then again using an inversion. You physically feel how the sentence changes where the listener's attention goes. You stop decorating sentences, and you start engineering ideas.
Engineering ideas. That is the perfect distillation of everything we've covered today. Let's bring this all together. The entire journey of this deep dive has been about a single massive paradigm shift. Stop translating your native words and start deploying native architecture.
You start by reprogramming your input. You listen for the point for scaffolding and the metaphor engine. You read not for facts, but to steal the rhetorical DNA of great thinkers, pulling concession pivots and reframes into your move bank.
You build your lexicon of thought, learning abstract vocabulary and stance verbs, not as translations, but as reasoning tools within their English ecosystem. You use writing as a slow mental gym to rehearse expressive range and compression. And finally, you use speaking and grammar to control focus. You deploy frameworks like PRP to give your thoughts instant structure, and you use clef sentences and inversion to shine a spotlight exactly where you want it. By doing all of this, your ideas will finally sound as big, as nuanced, and as intelligent in English as they actually are in your head.
If you want to put this into practice immediately, I highly encourage trying the drill from the sources today, the 10-second abstract answer. Take any complex abstract question relevant to your life or your industry and answer it out loud using the PRP framework. Point, reason, example point.
I love that.
Time yourself. Feel what it is like to just drop that pre-assembled architecture into place without hesitating.
That is a phenomenal challenge to start with. And as we wrap up, I want to leave you with a philosophical thought to chew on. This isn't explicitly stated in the source material, but looking at everything we've unpacked today, it inevitably points to this question.
I am intrigued. What is the question?
Well, if true C2 plus mastery means completely adopting the deductive point-first architecture of thought, if it means abandoning your native structures and fully adopting the specific conceptual metaphors of the English language to reason effectively, do you fundamentally change what you are capable of thinking?
Wow.
When you finally stop translating and you fully start thinking inside these English structural frameworks, does mastering the language actually rewire your worldview and not just your words?
That is a profound implication. If the tools you use to think change the thoughts themselves, must inevitably change as well. You aren't just changing how you deliver the message, you are altering the nature of the message itself.
Exactly. The shrinking personality phenomenon we talked about at the beginning. Maybe the ultimate cure isn't just about getting your English personality to catch up to your real personality. Maybe through this new architecture, your personality actually evolves into something completely new, something to mull over. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.